Hi friends, welcome back to How the Light Gets In. I want to have a story for this one, but I really don't. I watched HoneyBoy last night, and if you haven't heard of HoneyBoy, it is Shia LeBeouf's autobiographical film that he wrote while he was in rehab because he is an alcoholic and has PTSD. And I don't think this is hyperbole. What's the word? There we go, hyperbole. But it might be like the best movie I've ever seen, or at least the best movie that like the therapist part of me has ever seen. So HoneyBoy is fictionalized a little bit in that the main character's name is Otis instead of Shia, and like 10 out of 10 chance that I'm gonna use the names Otis and Shia interchangeably because I understand that he's talking about himself, and I can't be bothered to pay that much attention to it. Also because this is, you know, like just a reaction video, I didn't bother to like structure a whole bunch of stuff. And I'm saying it's because it's reactionary, but really it's because I'm lazy. So the movie takes place across two different timelines in 1995 when Otis/Shia is 12, and then 10 years later in 2005 when he is 22. So in 1995, he's living with his dad in a shady hotel in California, working on a television show, which I'm pretty sure is like a 1-to-1 for Even Stevens, which was kind of my favorite thing when I was in middle school, which is partly why I was so excited for this movie. And then in 2005, he is in a rehab facility working through his traumatic childhood and trying to figure out how not to be an angry alcoholic. Film-wise, it's structured really well. It's beautifully shot. The dialogue is incredible. It's very well written. It's very well made. The casting is like real good. It's got one of the kids from A Quiet Place in it who didn't really get to like, you know, speak because that movie's about silence. But he fucking nailed it in HoneyBoy. HoneyBoy is so good. If you have Amazon Prime, go watch it. It's only like an hour and a half long, and it's like so good. You will make the cries and you will also laugh a lot. So on top of it just being a good movie, I also think that HoneyBoy spoke really, really well and accurately to the nature of trauma, and particularly complex trauma. If you've never heard the term complex trauma, that refers specifically to people who have experienced repeated traumatic events, particularly in childhood and particularly during their more critical developmental periods. Coincidentally, kind of, the day before I watched this movie, I also had completed a 2-day neurobiology of trauma training. So my brain's kind of on fire right now. I spend a lot of time thinking about trauma because that's a lot of what my practice is focused about. And I get real nerdy about it because the things that we are learning every single day about what trauma does to your brain and your body are crazy fascinating. So one thing that I really, really loved about the portrayals of Otis in therapy in this movie is that his therapist routinely asks him for his SUDS when he is upset. So SUDS is an acronym. Therapists love acronyms. It stands for Subjective Units of Distress Scale. And that's something that we really use in trauma therapy. It's a way of gauging how activated you are by whatever we're talking about. So if I ask for your SUDS, what I want is a number between 0 and 100 or 0 and 10, depending. Some people use a 10-point scale, some people use a 100-point scale, it doesn't really matter. Where 10 or 100 is like the most distressing thing you can imagine, and 0 is totally fine, like neutral, okay. So she repeatedly asks for that, and then once she gets it, she uses grounding activities to bring him back down. So in this movie, the grounding activities that she uses is like, name 5 things that you see, and Otis has these rubber bands around his wrist that he snaps as he's listing these things off. Because the combination of identifying external objects and feeling that pain is a way to pull yourself out of the deeper, more emotional parts of your brain and back into your higher reasoning. So I loved the way that they portrayed that because generally speaking, movies and TV shows don't bother to make therapy look realistic, partly because it's not that interesting and partly for like the drama of it, which is fine, except it gives people really, really inappropriate expectations from therapy. Because, like, I don't know if you ever saw the Joseph Gordon-Levitt movie, 50/50. Yeah, That is not the kind of behavior that psychologists should be exhibiting. Also, there's this show on Netflix that I could literally only watch one episode of because I got so angry I like couldn't function. It's called Gypsy. It has Naomi Watts in it, and I love Naomi Watts. So I was like, oh, I'll watch this. And then it's about this therapist who's like out in the world, like meddling in her clients' lives and like meeting their daughters and shit at their, it's very upsetting. Don't watch it because that's not what we do. And if we did, we would lose our licenses. Okay, I'm sorry. I got a little excited there. Back to HoneyBoy. The portrayals of how trauma therapy takes place were really, really good. And the portrayals of the kind of things that people are taught at good rehab facilities were excellent. Because it's all about like, here's how you self-soothe, here's how you pull yourself out of that traumatic memory, here's how you manage your own expectations and manage your own emotions and find more constructive ways to deal with these things. I think it's interesting to note that the statistics on addiction and trauma are, like the numbers are so crazy that it seems like it has to be wrong, but it's not. Approximately 90% of people who have addiction issues are people with traumatic histories. And I think the reason for that is probably really clear, but it's that addiction is an escape. Substance use is an escape. If you get drunk enough, you don't have to think about the terrible shit that happened to you. If you smoke enough weed, that anxious part of your brain is gonna go offline because you're not, functioning. All of those things provide a way to kind of put your problems in a box and not deal with them anymore. And I personally, this is what I tell my clients and this is what I tell myself. Whether or not I'm rationalizing is another topic for another day. But I think that we all deserve to do that sometimes. Like we shouldn't have to live our lives 100% steeped in our own stress and our own trauma. We should be allowed to put it in a box and put it away sometimes. The problem becomes when that is the only outlet that you have. When the only way that you can deal with stress or difficulty is to run away from it. And whether that's by using drugs or alcohol or overeating or over-exercising or risky sexual behavior or, whatever, any of those endorphin-y rush escapist things that kind of fall under that umbrella of addiction. They're all valid coping mechanisms in the short term. They're just not good adaptive responses in the long term. And in Otis's case in this movie and Shia's case in real life, that maladaptive response was alcohol. There are some really, I don't want to say upsetting because it wasn't really upsetting, but it was kind of jarring. Like the first 5 minutes of the movie are clips of Otis making movies interwoven with clips of Otis just living his life. And the only way to really tell the difference between the two is that in the real life clips, Otis is like straight chugging handles of whiskey. And I've never seen a human being do that and not vomit, so it was a little bit disturbing. There's a dog here. So the traumatic piece of Otis's life has a lot to do with his dad and a lot to do with his mom, because of course it does. In the flashback portion of the film in 1995, he's about 12 years old. He lives with his dad in a fairly sketchy motel somewhere in California. And his dad, it is made clear, is a recovering addict. Except I don't think he's that recovering. Like at one point he says that his sobriety date is in 1988, which would be 7 years prior. But I feel like he's drinking like the whole time. I don't know how accurate that is. I could be wrong. I mean, he definitely relapses towards the end of the film, but I think there's probably some covert substance use in there as well that's not really addressed. So whether or not that 7 years of sober time is accurate or not, I can't say. It seems pretty likely that the father in this movie also has PTSD, and it seems pretty likely that he may also have narcissistic personality disorder. At some point, we are probably going to talk at length about personality disorders because there's a lot to unpack there. What I will say about narcissistic personality disorder right now is that the way that it has been best explained to me is that when you're a kid, everything is supposed to be about you. And if it's not, then when you're an adult, everything is about you. And that's kind of the genesis point of narcissistic personality disorder, at least in theory. One thing that this movie really demonstrates, I think, is what's called intergenerational trauma, which is the idea that the trauma that we go through winds up being absorbed by our children and by our children's children. I'm not gonna do like the whole like Emma Cott family tree, but suffice it to say, there's like some real shit if you go back a couple generations, like really real shit. And what we're learning from neurobiology now is that the trauma that our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents experienced, it fundamentally changes on a genetic level so that that is passed on to us. We wind up, I can't remember the name for it. It doesn't matter. I started trying to explain something I don't fully understand. But it does change the functioning of our brain. And we don't have to be the ones who have the trauma. It can come from way back. Like they've done studies that have determined that in Jewish families where members of the family lived through the Holocaust and like were in concentration camps and things like that, their children and their children's children are more likely to have like post-trauma responses to stressful events than people who did not. And that even though Jewish culture as a whole has that shared experience of the Holocaust, having actually lived through it seems to trigger a stronger stress response system in the descendants. So there's this part at the end where the father is in an AA meeting and he's kind of telling his own story. And then there's a part closer to the end where he is talking about knowing who you are in the context of your family and talking about how everyone in our family has had all this pain and the only thing they could do with that pain is to drink their way through it. He talks about his mother being an alcoholic who married a very abusive alcoholic who was physically very abusive towards the father and all the things that he lived through, and then the ways that those are still presenting themselves in Otis's life as a child. I don't know what to do with that thought, but I think it's an important thing to be aware of. The stuff that happens to us impacts the children that we may not even have yet, simply because of the way that trauma impacts our brain. It's a very real thing. My very favorite line of the whole movie, Otis is talking to his therapist in the 2005 sequence about the nature of his trauma and about the things he's been through and about his relationship with his father. And what Otis says is, the only thing my father ever gave me that was of any value is pain, and you want to take that away from me. And I had to pause the movie at that point so that I could cry for like 5 straight minutes, because it is so reminiscent of the things that I hear from my clients with trauma. People fear that and to be clear, there's no version of trauma therapy where I take your trauma away from you. That's not a thing. What I do is work to remove the emotion from it and integrate it more adaptively into your neural network. Those are fun words. So basically I just make it so that it's easier to function without that trauma constantly like hijacking your brain and making you not function. And so I hear all the time from my trauma clients that like, they don't know who they would be without this trauma. And if they lose it, which they're not gonna do, but if they lose it, they're not gonna know who they are anymore. And so it just was really beautiful because it's such an honest display of what it's like to be someone with a significant trauma history, trying to move through that and trying to find a better way of being. Because everything that you've ever known is based on that trauma. Trauma impacts both the deepest structures of our brain and our higher reasoning. It impacts every aspect of how our brain functions in stressful times and in non-stressful times, because developmental trauma can make it difficult to tell the difference between stressful times and non-stressful times. There's a dog here. And so it's always made a lot of sense to me that people would have that moment of pause before deciding to try and deal with their trauma, because this has dictated everything about who I am. And if I lose it, what am I? Who am I? What do I do? Honestly, like, I wonder if, and like, there's no way for me to know for sure, but I did wonder once I had finished watching the movie, whether or not people who aren't me and aren't like deeply entrenched in the world of trauma would pick up on all of the traumatic events that take place in the course of this film, because some of them are very, very subtle. But because of the way Otis's father's brain works, he consistently devalues Otis, and he consistently sets Otis up to feel like a failure. No matter what he's doing, it's not good enough. And if he thinks he's doing good, then he's basically punished for it. And so there's all these very subtle moments where the father is very clearly like projecting his own insecurity and his own feelings on his son constantly and on everyone else. Like Otis has a big brother through the Big Brothers Big Sisters program that is a real trigger point for the father, primarily because I think he feels like the big brother is taking his position as Otis's father and like adult male figure. And I mean, that ends pretty explosively, as you can imagine. But on top of all of these more subtle traumatic moments, there's also a few really, really intense ones. The one that for me was the most difficult to watch is when Otis's mom calls to check in on him, and Otis is on the phone with her, and basically through Otis, the dad and the mom have an argument. And Otis is literally like basically playing the roles of his parents to have this argument for them. Like his dad will yell something at him and he'll repeat it to his mom, and his mom will yell something into the phone and Otis will repeat it to his dad. And there's like a few back and forth, and then his dad snatches the phone and kicks Otis out of the room, and they just scream at each other for a while. And I think probably the reason I found that so upsetting is because I've heard people explain that that has happened to them, but I've never like seen it occur in real time. And even though it's a movie, and even though I know that like it's not real, it felt very true to the stories that I have heard. And so it just kind of like, it was upsetting, and it made me cry again. I cried a lot in this movie. It's really good, but it's gonna get you. I don't know. I don't know what else there is to say about HoneyBoy. I think you should watch it. Again, it's not very long. It's streaming for free on Amazon Prime. I don't really understand why Shia did not get like an Oscar nod or something, because that was a really well executed screenplay and a beautiful movie, and his performance playing his own father was incredible. I watched a couple interviews of Shia talking about writing the movie and putting it together, and he tells a story that when he told his dad he was going to make the movie, he told his dad that Mel Gibson was going to be the one playing his father in the movie so that he would sign off on it. And I just find that kind of hilarious because Mel Gibson doesn't really make movies anymore. But I don't know. I've been half in love with Shia LeBeouf since I was about 12 years old because Even Stevens was an incredible show. And Shia's a really good actor. I've seen him in a lot of things where I'm like, wow, this guy knows what he's doing. And I don't know if you've ever seen the Shia LeBeouf actual Cannibal video, which I'm going to go ahead and link below because it endlessly delights me. But I've just always really enjoyed him, and I've enjoyed the mystique around him because he is, I'd almost put him in the same category as James Franco, except I think James Franco's a bad person and I don't think Shia LaBeouf is a bad person, where they just seem to constantly be doing a lot, and a lot of it seems kind of out there to me. But I don't know, to see this movie, I feel, is to better understand who Shia LaBeouf is as a person and what motivates him. And more than that, generalizing that to just the impact of trauma and the treatment of trauma. At some point we will probably do a multi-series on trauma and what it does to the brain, but I need to be able to talk about it without consistently consulting notes, because that's not fun to watch, and I'm not at that point yet. Yeah, see, this is what happens when I don't structure videos and just plan on talking about stuff, is that it gets all wibbly wobbly and weird. But thanks for watching this mess. You can get in touch with me at howthelightgetsinvids@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter at HTLGIvids. You can also follow me on Instagram, which is emma.cott. Comment below and share and subscribe, and there's so many buttons underneath my face right now. Just push some of them and see what happens. It'll be fun. All right, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.